ceremonious lamp. To light the ceremonious lamp, may I invite on stage Honorable Vice Chancellor Sir, Registrar Sir, and all the esteemed dignitaries. Ladies and gentlemen, as we light the ceremonious lamp, may I kindly request you all to kindly rise on your seats. Thank you for doing the honor. May I request you all to kindly take your seats. Moving ahead, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a matter of great honor that we have with us today Professor Sri Rao. Before I invite Sir on stage to deliver the keynote address, let me brief you all about Sir and his proposed address. Dr. Sri Rao is a professor and dean at IIT Bangalore. Sir has received his PhD in computer science from the University of Iowa, and before that he has his MS in logic and computation from Carnegie Mellon University. Sir was an ACM Distinguished Speaker from 2015 to 2021 and is presently an IEEE Computer Society Distinguished Visitor. Sir is a member of the ACM and a senior member of the IEEE. He is also a lifetime member of the American Mathematical Society and the Computer Society of India. Sir is one of the editorial boards of Sadhana, the Knowledge Engineering Review, and PLOS One, and has had editing assignments for the IEEE system journals and Frontiers in Public Health. Sir has been a reviewer for many journals of several major publishers and has served as a program committee member for several international conferences. Sir has also been a reviewer for the Fulbright Fellowship and has also reviewed proposals for the NWO and other scientific bodies. He has also been a regular reviewer with over 90 published reviews for the ACM Computing Review journals, which reviews a sample of the latest publication related to computer science. Sir is a contributing member of the NITD 14 Software and System Engineering Sectional Committee, a National Mirror Committee of the ISO IEC subcommittees, GTC1 Section 7 Software and System Engineering and GTC1 Section 38 Cloud Computing of the Bureau of Indian Standards, BIS, as well as the NITD 31 Cloud Computing and Distributed Platforms and TED 20 Intelligent Transportation Systems sectional committees of the BIS. He is also an expert committee member for the Technology Development Board, Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. Sir is also a member of the Expert Committee on Technology for the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, NSDI, which comes under the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. Sir is going to deliver his address on computational sustainability, which will underscore the critical imperative for sustainability, emphasizing the development of computational solutions to address pressing environmental issues. Delving into the intricacies of the carbon cycle, the talk elucidates how human activities have disrupted natural balances, resulting in escalating atmospheric carbon dioxide levels and contributing to climate change and ocean acidification. The core concept of computational sustainability is introduced, defined as the utilization of models and algorithms to harmonize environmental, economic, and human needs, encompassing areas of green IT and the application of computing to sustainability challenges. There is a brief discussion of various aspects of computational sustainability, covering renewable energy, integration in computing, data center efficiency metrics, and algorithms optimizing computing job schedules for solar power utilization. Shifting focus to electric vehicles, the talk explores certain computational issues with their use. The talk also briefly delves into the ethical considerations surrounding sustainability efforts, envisions a post-carbon future, and cautions against companies engaging in greenwashing without substantial change. Ultimately, it advocates for the urgency of working for sustainability and suggests the potential of energy computational approaches to provide effective solutions. Now, before we invite Sir to deliver the keynote address, we'd like to felicitate Sir with a Pulam Tamusa and a memento as a mark of our appreciation and respect. To do the honor, may I invite Sir on stage, as well as our Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, to kindly felicitate our keynote speaker, Professor Sri Sir Rao, sir.
Once again, sir, welcome. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. May I now have the pleasure to invite you to deliver your keynote address.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
I hope you're not as tired as I am because I've been traveling all day. What is your excuse? So, anyway, this is a topic that I have personally worked on or thought about for a very long time now, and I think which many of us should be thinking about. It's not a classical part of computer science curricula, but it should be, and it should really not be just something that only some people think about. It's something that many of us do need to worry about much more than we do. And that's the point here. By the way, I'm very interruptive, so if you have any questions or doubts or you just want to share a thought, feel free, especially the students. And so we just get right into it. First question, why should this be something that we care about? Why should anyone care about this? Computational sustainability is not really a standard topic. It's not something that many people think about. It's not something that many people have discussed traditionally. So why we should think about this is this. The real world is catching up really fast. We cannot really bury our head in the sand or really be ignorant about this. So July of 2023 was the hottest month ever recorded by human beings. Can you guess what was the hottest year ever? No prizes for guessing. It was 2023. So not only was the month the hottest month, and the year was the hottest year. So on the whole, that year, the year that we just saw, the previous year was the hottest year, and these are all sort of the variations from the long-term average. So you can see the temperature anomaly is quite pronounced all over the world. It's not just happening locally or not just happening once in a while. And in fact, it really is getting that bad. So if you actually stop and think about this, February, the previous month, last month, was the hottest February ever. And this is the 9th consecutive warmest month. So since last year, we have been having record-setting months one after the other, 9 in a row. Now, so that's once again showing that there is something really happening here. This is not a one-time thing. This is not something that just happened once and we can just forget about it. This is really happening. This is really there. This is really something that we have to think about right now. If we stop and decide to put it off for some other time, there will not be much of a time later. And that's one reason why we have to actually think about this. And my idea to you as a computer scientist is that I went all the way through to a PhD in computer science without ever having to worry about what are the actual resource costs of the work we do. So, in computer science we have these very elegant treatments, mathematical theories about the Bigelow complexity and automata theory and this and that. They teach us many good things, they teach us how to theorize in very good ways, but they never actually teach us to think what is the actual cost, the real value or the real harm done when I implement this in reality. What actually happens? What does it actually take to make this happen in practice? What is the energy cost or the resource required for something like this to happen? So somehow the assumption always has been that you will always have a plug point to the wall and you will always be able to plug your machine into the power socket and you will always have power there. That's not true anymore, right? So there are certain other issues which I am not discussing here, but it's really a point, it really has gone to a point where computing is a major contributor to global warming. Computer science cannot afford to remain ignorant as it has for a very long time about the sustainability issues with computing, and that is my message to you. So in some sense, this is an invitation for you to actually apply your own mind. This is not a finished subject. This is not even close to being a finished subject. And this is not only a computing subject, but at the same time, I think most of us are computer scientists, many of us are. At the same time, we cannot really afford to be detached and let other people run the show. Okay, we have to actually contribute in some way, and that's what this is also about. So, one more sort of horror story here. So, the long-term goal was that we should stay within 1.5 degrees Celsius of the old pre-industrial global temperature. So if it goes beyond 1.5 Celsius, then something really bad will happen. All the polar ice caps will melt. The glaciers will melt. Some rivers will start running dry. A lot of desertification. A lot of sea level rise beyond control. And that unfortunately is about to happen very soon. 2027 is not that far away. When I was young, 2027 seemed like a lifetime away. But now it's not. It's very close. It's just a few years from now, and that's actually getting to a point where we are seeing this happening year after year. These highs are not just theories, they're not just something that's out in the future. This is upon us. This is a train that's about to happen, and we have to actually watch out for it and do something about it if possible. So that once again is the point of all this. Okay, so coming back to our discussion here. So why sustainability, and then we talked a little bit about the Earth's carbon cycle and what in particular is computational sustainability. And then I talked a little bit about some of the work that my students and I have done for the last few years on renewable energy computing, electric vehicles, and then I briefly touch on ethics and some other issues very briefly. And once again, this is not meant to be a finished subject. This is not something where you actually mug up a bunch of facts and you are prepared to write an exam on that subject and it's a completed textbook subject where you know everything. No. This is very much an open discipline. We don't have the solutions yet. And not only that, these are very real, very dire global problems. And I don't think anybody has the complete answer to this right now. At the same time, all of us have to put our minds to it and do something about it, start doing something about it pretty much immediately. And there is a very well-known quote by Johann Bertrand. It comes from a book it comes from a report called the Bertrand Report. And this was in the year 1987. And she actually articulated this for the very first time. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So the point here is that in many cases, if you have massive deforestation or massive amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that can all be very good for a short time, but it eventually ruins the show for all the generations which are to come. What happens to the people who are not even born yet? What is their stake? How do you worry about what happens to the world by the time your grandkids get here? It's not just theoretical, it's something that all of us have to think about. That's one. And then the other thing is that very often when you look at all the global warming statistics and so on, you sort of feel like giving up. You see, this is not really in my control. There's nothing I can really do. And for that, my response to you would be a very well-known quote once again by a philosopher called Edmund Burke, which says that who said that nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little. So the point here once again is that although all of us individually, each of us individually can do very little, all of us collectively can do a lot. And it is a very serious, tragic mistake for us to do nothing simply because we cannot do much. And therefore, we have to actually put our mind to it and do something. Okay? So why sustainability? Once again, concerns with environmental degradation, climate change, and so on are quite common now. You've all heard this, and of course, we've seen statistics like the ones I just showed you. But many times people don't appreciate this, that this is not the first time humanity is facing this problem. This is not the first time in human history that this kind of thing has happened. And there are very well-known stories, there are very well-known events in history which show what happens when you ignore these problems. And that's actually a warning to us. So the history of the human history actually is also a history of ecology and a history of what happens when you ignore persistent problems on a very massive scale. So famous stories, famous civilizations like the Mayan civilization in South America, Mesopotamia, which was I think present-day Iraq, and of course the Indus Valley, which is where our country comes in. All of these suffered quite greatly and they eventually completely disappeared. And what we don't realize, and what many of us have not really thought about, is that this actually had a lot to do with ecological distress and climate change. So even they suffered a lot, and even they had to pay a very heavy price for it. And then pandemics and climate change also had a very important role in the fall of the Roman Empire. So in many different countries, in many different contexts, many different civilizations over many different centuries even, this has been a persistent common factor. So this also gives us a warning, right? So don't assume that the world order, whatever you think is your comfort level in society, is going to stay the same. These kinds of issues can upset whatever we take for granted in a massive way, beyond our control. And in our own time, climate change is the biggest global health threat in the 21st century. Why is that a health threat? Anyone think about that? Why would climate change constitute a health threat? It can be a comfort threat, but where is the health issue coming in? Any guesses on that? It's a health issue also because, for example, mosquitoes were not seen in certain latitudes. Mosquito-borne diseases were confined to certain tropical climates, but now mosquitoes are migrating to formerly very cold regions. Mosquito-borne diseases have a much bigger spread now because of global warming. Similarly, certain kinds of lung infections, certain kind of breathing problems, all those are much more common now because of that. And also when you have certain other kinds of human-animal conflicts that causes certain health problems. For example, that's actually not proven yet, but we all went through this really bad pandemic recently. And there are suspicions or there are problems like that where people suspect that when you have human-animal interactions of unforeseen or unforeseeable nature, you will have more such pandemics and more such problems. So in general, the wisdom here is that climate change is the biggest single global health threat in the 21st century, which is one we are living in. And it has the potential to cause wars and serious conflicts and disrupt global order. So, and of course, greenhouse gases, all of us know this. Yes?
Are you meaning to say it's a sine wave we learn from history? Roman civilization vanished, Indus Valley vanished, and everything has to go up and come down, or what is the thing you are saying?
I think the warning is out there. What we do with it is up to us. I don't know what the future shape of this wave is. I cannot foresee. I'm not a soothsayer, but yeah, I cannot forecast the future, but I know that there is a very serious warning light out there, and we have to think about it and do something about it with time remaining. Okay, so greenhouse gases, once again, we all know what the greenhouse effect and what greenhouse gases are. And these are gases that have a tendency to trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere, and then that results in the greenhouse effect, we know that. And greenhouse gases are emitted naturally as well as by human-caused processes, anthropogenic processes. And anthropogenic processes are the primary contributors to greenhouse gases right now. Carbon dioxide is the most common greenhouse gas, but there also are other ones like methane and various other industrial chemicals and so on. And these greenhouse gases are going to contribute to changes in important tangible ways. So this is no longer a controversial subject. The statistics and the facts are too obvious now. And in this regard, one issue that I frankly did not know until a very long time is something called the Earth's carbon cycle. We probably studied something in school and so on, but I didn't really understand it as well as I should have. And in fact, nobody really understands it nearly as well as they should. There are some parts of it which are not really completely understood even now. There are some parts of it which don't really make sense, and physicists are trying to modulate, and there are partial successes but not really complete explanations. So the carbon cycle is a cycle of carbon, how it actually gets emitted and how it actually gets back, how it gets stored again. And for our purposes, we may split the carbon cycle into three major components: terrestrial, which is land-based; aquatic, which is ocean-based; and anthropogenic, which is human-caused. And I will very briefly talk about what these things are. So look only at the terrestrial component. So in the terrestrial component, what you have is you have the atmospheric CO2, and then that atmospheric CO2 is trapped by plants through photosynthesis, and that becomes organic compounds through photosynthesis, and then those organic compounds are then used to feed both plants and animals, both animals and human beings, in fact. And then once the animals and so on, when they pass, then that becomes dead organic matter, which can then have, it can either remain in the soil, or you have respiration, or you can have animal respiration when the animal eats that when the animal eats that plant, and through that it comes back into the atmosphere as CO2. And similarly, even the dead organic matter, you have decomposers which respirate and bring that back to the atmosphere. So this is the naturally occurring terrestrial carbon cycle. Okay, and to this, you have to note that carbon is captured from the atmosphere only by plants during photosynthesis, and subsequently it enters plant and animal bodies. And then the carbon that is captured is released back into the atmosphere by both plants and animals, and to a smaller extent through natural combustion. Right? You can have a forest fire or something along those lines. Now, to the terrestrial one, we also add the aquatic one. So in the aquatic one, what happens? You have CO2 dissolved in the oceans, which once again you have both uptake and diffusion. So the CO2 which is in the ocean can come up to the atmosphere, and then the atmospheric CO2 also gets dissolved back into the ocean. And then within the ocean, you have a whole complex ecosystem. You have marine biota, which includes both plants and animals. And there once again you have some photosynthesis within the ocean, and you also have respiration once again within the ocean. So you have carbon dioxide going from the ocean water into the animal bodies of plants and so on, and then back again. And then once again, when the marine biota pass, then you have sediments in the ocean. Right? So that's one way that you actually have carbon being trapped into sediments through the marine ecosystem or through the dead organic matter on the terrestrial ecosystem. And then, of course, on a very long-term basis, we look at billions of years and so on. Some of these sediments can become fossils, and that they become coal and petroleum and so on, and those are the sources of the fossil fuels. And those fossil fuels from this box, this is where we come in, and we come in a very unproductive and unhelpful way. So this is the natural carbon cycle. You have an aquatic cycle based on life forms in the ocean. The terrestrial and aquatic together make up the natural carbon cycle. So this, sorry. So this is the natural carbon cycle as it was before the Industrial Revolution, before human beings really came in and messed things up. So this is where it was, this is how it had continued for many, many thousands of years, and it had been largely successful, or it had been largely stable. So you have photosynthesis in the terrestrial system as well as photosynthesis in the aquatic system. You have algae and so on, phytoplankton, which capture carbon in the ocean, and then that drives the ecosystem in the ocean also. And then when you have human beings in the system, you have the third leg of the carbon cycle, which is the anthropogenic. In the anthropogenic, once again, it's very clear. You have fossil fuels, and then we, human beings, we extract the fossil fuels and we use them. And then you have waste and exhaust happening, and that waste and exhaust, those emissions go back into the atmosphere. So what is happening here is that a lot of the carbon which was stored over a very, very long time, over eons, as fossil fuels, that is all getting released now into the atmosphere. The rest of the carbon cycle here, this was pretty much balanced. But this is now an unbalanced use which is coming in thanks to human beings. And of course, now there is also a move, people are trying to actually have carbon capture and storage through a process or a series of processes called sequestration. So you want to have industrial processes where you actually, rather than releasing the exhaust back into the atmosphere, you want to actually sequester the carbon and keep it, rather than release it openly into the atmosphere. But this is not happening on an industrial scale for the most part. Most of the carbon that is actually emitted by human beings through waste and exhaust goes back into the atmosphere. So this is more or less the complete picture of the carbon cycle as it is now, with both the traditional terrestrial, aquatic and anthropogenic, three parts. And the industrial revolution, of course, has depended on human beings' abilities to produce and utilize large amounts of energy through combustion, either internal or external. Think about it. Before the industrial revolution, what was the way to do any work? You had to have either human beings, human labor, or you had to have animals, like farm animals or some other animals, elephants or donkeys or something else like that. The industrial revolution actually happened. It was made possible because it was possible to harness energy through steam engines and later IC engines and so on. And that in turn means that this had to happen. We had to have this fossil fuel based energy source. This is the root of our success and also the root of our problems. Being able to create this energy and use this fossil fuel energy, this has been responsible for all the scientific advances and all the material prosperity that we have achieved. But this is also the source of the problem as far as the global warming and so on is concerned. So, and of course we have therefore had many intricate processes for extracting fossil fuel, the carbon stored in the earth's crust over many years, and use the same as energy sources for various kinds of machinery. And there has only been very recently the effort to have sequestration. So you want to, rather than emit the carbon back into the atmosphere, you want to sequester it and not let it go out, but that is not happening at scale. Only very small fragments of the carbon emitted are actually being stored and not on a very massive scale. So this is what it is. So the anthropogenic imbalance in the carbon cycle is happening because the carbon emitted into the atmosphere, which was once again the carbon stored over many years ago, is not really being captured, and we still have to depend on photosynthesis only. So if you stop and think about it, there is no real solution here. Where is the carbon actually getting captured? The carbon is actually getting captured here and here through photosynthesis. And that was in balance as long as this was not there. But now, first of all, these systems are much smaller in scope, and we also have interfered with them to a very large extent by cutting down forests and so on. So because you have a much bigger source of emission coming out here, and these are at best working at the old level, and in fact in many cases not even that, that is why you have anthropogenic imbalances in the carbon cycle. And then therefore you have less carbon being captured naturally and much more carbon entering the atmosphere. You have this unbalanced problem where you have a huge amount of carbon, and that is detectable. So there was a very big news some years ago, I think some of the older people here will recall this, that the parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for the first time crossed 400. Now it could be like 440 or something, right? It's even more than that. And that was more than at any time since the dinosaurs. So human beings in all of human history, all of known human history, have never lived with as much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as we have right now. And what is the long-term impact of that? We don't frankly know. We don't really understand this, and we don't really have a way to guess what it might be. So the first thing we have to think about is that if you have excessive CO2 and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, you have to first stop or slow down the emissions. So there's a very well-known quote from Bill Rogers: if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. The first thing is, before you even climb out of the hole, stop making the problem any worse. And that is where a lot of the sustainability challenges come in. We don't really have an immediate way to reverse all the damage that has been done, but stop making the problem any worse. Please stop. That's where we are right now. And this is a very important reason we want to push away from fossil fuels as energy sources. And then, unfortunately, of course, reducing new emissions, which itself is quite challenging, does not really remove all the carbon that's already out there. All the greenhouse gases that have already been emitted, those are not going away just because you stop making the problem worse. We'll have to still think about that, but nonetheless, at least we stop making the problem any worse. So here, once again, you have two very well-known pieces of, one very well-known piece of news. So this is from a few years ago where Elon Musk, famous guy, he put out this announcement that he would have a big prize, $100 million, for the best carbon capture technology. I don't know if this prize has ever been claimed or if anyone is still working on it. I think people are working on it, but the best carbon capture technologies I have heard of, once again, knowing that I'm not a chemical engineer and therefore I'm not very good at knowing what this is, but nonetheless, nothing here really is doing work at scale. There are very small pilot projects or good projects or good ideas which seem to do a reasonable job at a small scale, but nothing that really can happen on a very, very big scale. So that's what this is. So people are working on this, but not really fast enough. So the second thing that people want to do is to have this whole notion of carbon neutrality. So carbon neutrality is in the context of minimizing greenhouse gas emissions and other such things. So even if you're not completely carbon neutral, you want to minimize your carbon footprint. So how much carbon are you emitting at a personal level, or how much carbon is this university emitting in a year or in a day or in a month? So, for example, my home institution, we don't know what our carbon footprint is, and I would be lying to say that we are perfect, we are far from it. But, for example, we have, I think, 40 or 50% of our power generation is solar. We have solar panels on several of our buildings, and they generate enough power to supply about 40 or 50% of our need. And similarly, we recycle a lot of our water and things like that. So we received some kind of award recently, I forget where, something out of New York and so on. So anyway, so the summit successes, we want to have this whole notion that we should reduce or minimize the carbon footprint. Carbon footprint, once again, is a glorified term to say how much carbon are you or your organization or your institution putting out there. So you want to actually reduce the amount of CO2 directly or indirectly emitted into the atmosphere by your activity. And once again, as I just mentioned, in 2017, the atmospheric CO2 crossed 400 ppm in May of 2017, and then that is the highest it has ever been in mankind's history. And in fact, now it has gone even past that. It must be like approaching 450 now. I don't know what the latest number is. So that was all a very detailed look at why we should have sustainability and what are the issues with sustainability. And now I'll get a little closer to home, think about what computational sustainability means. So this is called as a new interdisciplinary research field with the overall goal of developing computational methods, tools, and models, methods, and tools to help manage the balance between environmental, economic, and societal needs for sustainable development. So once again, here the point is that computer scientists for the longest time, and I'm speaking mainly about myself, not to badmouth other people, we have been eggheads. We have had our sort of very nice theories and theorems and very theoretical approaches, and we don't often think about how our work actually relates to practical realities, right? And that has to change. So that's what this is about. So we actually should start thinking about how you relate to sustainable development and how computer science and computer scientists can actually contribute to that. And therefore, we also have to think about the fact that it can only be studied and practiced meaningfully when you have both the socio-economic awareness as well as the computer science knowledge. You cannot have just one and not the other. You need to have both. And that is once again where I would blame myself, my tribe, which I define as theoretical computer scientist, and say that we have not done a good job so far because we have very little socio-economic awareness in many cases. We don't really know how the real world appreciates or does not appreciate our work in many cases. So, and one thing that I would sort of say is that in the larger sense, it is a mostly aspirational goal, right? It is like saying that, I want to cure cancer. Now, okay, is that really going to happen? Probably not, but you can have incremental advances which nonetheless help some people, right? So in the same way, computational sustainability is not a complete solution. It's not something out of the box that you can actually plug in and make everything perfect. At the same time, it's an effort, once again, going by the dictum that we want to keep doing something even if we're not perfect at it. And so we have to have approaches which individually cover some small aspects of the problem, but nonetheless we keep working on it, and we hope that someday we will actually get to the point where we have done enough. And computational sustainability in general has two aspects to this. One is, of course, what would be called as green IT or sustainable computing, which is how do you reduce the carbon footprint of computing systems themselves. And why would you need to do that? Any idea? Why, for example, do you know what the primary cost of cloud computing is? How many of you know what cloud computing is in general? Yes. What is the single biggest cost in cloud computing or in data centers? I would let the students answer. not the professors. Yeah. No. So I'll give out what is the worst kept secret in IT. In cloud computing or in data centers, the power bill, the cost of electricity is the biggest cost. It is more than the hardware, the software, the manpower, whatever else, the land, the buildings, anything else. It's really true that the power consumption of large, and of course this is also true with your LLMs and all your ChatGPT and so on, GPT-4, GPT-5, whatever you have. All of these, the power consumption is the single biggest cost. So in all these cases, you have to wonder, okay, what happens if I actually don't have the power? Or is this really responsible? In fact, recently there was a sort of a mini scandal a couple of years ago, some of you may know. There was a researcher who claimed that Google's AI model is unethical. And do you know why she said that? She said that because she thought the power consumption was too high. It is irresponsible to have an LLM that consumes so much power and therefore contributes so much to sustainability issues and makes the problem so much worse. And Google, of course, fired her, and they gave a different reason for it. They said whatever, but whatever it was, so there are ethical questions also around all these LLMs and so on. So the point here is that one part of it, what we know as called as green IT, deals with the question of how to make the computing system itself more energy efficient and make it consume less resources. The other aspect is, can I actually use IT ideas or IT resources or computing thought or computing approaches to have sustainable use of other resources? So for example, can I make my fresh water or forests or whatever else, can I use IT resources to help sustainability goals in those areas? So that would be called as sustainability in general, and this is called sustainable computing, and both of these together would be computational sustainability. So there are two aspects to this. IT itself or computing itself is also pretty messy. You of course also know that when IT systems get, when they pass their expiry date, they often go into landfills, and some of this stuff is quite nasty. You know, either you have very poisonous substances and so on. So the IT resources that we often use, you and I commonly use, they're not very clean. We think they're very clean, but they're not. And of course, the energy costs of IT are also huge. So for these reasons, you need to have the first aspect of it, which is green IT. You want to think about how to make it more green, more energy efficient, and more helpful or friendly towards the atmosphere or the environment in general. And the second aspect is how can I actually use IT to help sustainability goals in general. So there are approaches that people have tried to use. So this is a new type of computational sustainability, is a new type of discipline that is actually growing and will grow, keep growing in importance over the years to come. Because the real world is out there and it is doing what it is doing. We have to note that and make something happen. So in general, we have to think about the fact that computational innovations and technologies in general are, of course, very, very interesting, exciting. Blockchain and whatever else we have, all the LLMs, all those things are very good. But it's also a very good thing to think about how to use computational approaches to help with sustainability in general also. Okay, so coming back to this, coming back to the first point rather. So when you think about green IT and so on, sustainable computing, what are some issues that we need to think about and how do you actually think about them? So the first thing is, what are renewable resources? Renewable resources are those which are replenished in nature when you have consumption happening in an orderly way. So good water, wildlife and so on, and solar and wind energy, these are renewable because we will also be there the next day if you consume them in an orderly fashion. Non-renewable resources are coal and petroleum, metallic ores, and many other minerals and so on, because once you deplete them, they are not going to be there anymore. Those are non-renewable. And farmland, forests, and aquatic resources, for example, are renewable only when you use them responsibly, not otherwise. And the idea, an important idea in sustainability is to use renewable resources wherever possible and to limit the amount of non-renewable resources that we use. And particularly when it comes to those which actually cause pollution and other such problems. And computers are not commonly thought of as power hogs, but many large data centers nowadays, they consume power at derivative megawatts. So you can, let me ask you a very simple question. Do you know how much power a pizza oven consumes? Rough guess. You must have seen a pizza oven sometime. Once again. And by comparison, how much power would a single server rack consume? Which consumes more power, a pizza oven or a server rack? A pizza oven will often be about the range of 5 kilowatts, not usually much more than that. A single server rack can be more than 20. So in many cases, you have more power being consumed by a single server rack than with a pizza oven. And that is why cooling in data centers is such a huge issue. Because it's like having a lot of pizza ovens in your computing center and you have to keep the system so cool all the time. That is the problem. And in fact, you may know this, right? That in many cases, Why is it that we have a certain limit on what the frequency of CPU can be? We have, what is that? Nowadays the frequency is like what, 3 gigahertz, give or take, around 2.5 to 3, right? So, yeah, so 2.5 to 3, maybe 3 in some cases, 2.5 is very common in a commercial setting. Why don't you make it 10 gigahertz? Because if you do, then it will be as hot as the inside of the sun or something like that. The temperature will go well beyond what it can actually tolerate. So thermal constraints are a very big problem in computing, something that you and I don't normally think about, but we should. And the energy costs of running computing systems, especially at scale, the energy costs dominate the running costs. Now, this is one important issue, which is if you actually buy a phone, right? Can you just do with the phone alone? I bought a very nice iPhone the other day and that's fine. Is that all there is? No. You also need a Wi-Fi plan. You need a phone calling plan, or you need a connection. You need to be able to do that. So every phone also requires a service to go with it. Similarly, if you have a car or a two-wheeler, you also need fuel for it. You also need an insurance plan. You also need to pay the road tax. You also need to have maintenance and repairs and all those things. So in general, there is something called total cost of ownership, TCO, and that consists of two parts. One is the initial cost and the second is the lifetime cost. So similarly, for a large computing system or even your laptop, as the case may be, you have the initial cost, which is the cost which you pay to purchase the laptop or the phone or whatever it is, and then there is a cost that you incur throughout its lifetime. And when you look at the total cost of ownership for any computing system, the energy cost is the biggest issue there. That's the point. It is also true for your refrigerator and AC and fridge and all that. We don't think about that. Those devices, in all those cases, the energy cost is the single biggest item in the running cost, in the lifetime cost of the system. And the same is also true of a data center. So the energy cost of a data center over its lifetime is far greater than the cost of its hardware, software, manpower, everything else. And therefore, that is the impetus for us to work on the energy efficiency of computing. Because if you simply, have a very good below algorithm and so on, that may not actually serve to do what you want it to do. And in general, for renewable energy sources, they have the characteristic that they are not available 24/7, right? Because the sun is not shining in the evening or at night, the wind is not always blowing. So, in such cases, a major challenge is to have a total balance of supply and demand in the absence of central coordination and control when you have independent suppliers and consumers. If you have many different suppliers and consumers, and you have a variable source of power or many variable sources of power, how do you actually run your system? And it turns out it's actually fairly easy to design a captive renewable energy source configuration where I just mentioned to you that my institution, ICDDA Bangalore, we get about 40 to 50% of our energy from the sun, right? And that's fine. I'm sure it could be done here if you all want to do it. But why can it not get to 100? It turns out that you can get to about 90 very much. You can get to 90 or 95% relatively easily. Not that easily, but relatively easily. But to get to 100 is not really possible. Sometimes it will increase the cost enormously. Can you guess why? You can get to 90 very well, but not so close to 100. Why is that? If I want to have 100% of the system energy coming from solar energy, what would be the problem compared to getting 90%? Why would the cost almost double? Any guesses?
Energy loss.
Energy?
Loss. Energy
Loss.
loss during the process.
No, that isn't only it. What happens is that if you look at the solar profile of any region in the world, really, almost any region, they say that, for example, the Sahara Desert and so on, they have, 320 days of sunshine per year. But most places don't. Today, for example, we were in Kolkata and it was completely overcast, right? It was very cloudy and so on. There was not very much sunshine happening there. So if you have to have a system which provides solar energy throughout the year for all of your needs, right? Then what do you have to do? Either you have to have a very large solar collector which will also collect when the sun is not really shining that brightly, or you will need to have a tremendous amount of battery storage capacity so that you will store the power even when the sun is not very bright, even when the sunshine is weak, right? So either you end up with a very large generating capacity which is well in excess of what you need on most days, or you need a large amount of storage capacity which is well more than what you need. So because in almost any area in the world, you will always end up with some 5 or 10 days in a row when the sun is not shining or not shining that brightly. And in such cases, you will end up with a system which does not really fulfill 100% of your energy needs. So that is what it is, that is the real problem. That is why you can actually design a system, you can actually come up with a configuration where you can meet about 90 or even 95% of the energy needs of a system through solar and wind energy and so on, but getting to 100 is prohibitively expensive in almost all cases. So what does this mean? This means that renewable energy cannot be your sole source of energy. In spite of all the bad things I just said, and which are actually true, I didn't make them up, about non-renewable sources and how bad it is and how much carbon dioxide we're putting out and so on, you will not really be able to get rid of the non-renewable sources in the near future. That's not going to really be possible, right? So that's something we have to also appreciate. And the other one is that energy efficient scheduling of jobs in the system with multiple machines is NP-hard. I think most of us know what NP-hard means. Even in the case of static scheduling with fixed dependencies, in many cases you have dynamic dependencies and we don't know how the jobs will arrive and so on. And energy efficiency itself is defined in two different ways. One way is to take the least amount of energy to complete some work, and the second is to minimize the fraction of idle or wasted energy consumed in the system while doing some work. So the first one is that finish the work with the least amount of total energy taken, possibly. And the second one is to waste as little as possible, but I don't care how much you actually take. And this metric, which is called power usage effectiveness, is a ratio, it's a fraction, which is typically more than 1. So a PUE of 1 means that all of your energy in a data center is going into computing. If you also have cooling and lighting and so on, which you do, then the total energy divided by the computing energy will be the PUE. And so in, for example, most cases in India, a PUE of about 2 or 2.5 is considered excellent. So a PUE of 2 means that you are taking 1 unit of energy for computing and 1 unit for your heating and lighting and cooling and all those things. And so that actually is considered very good in a tropical country like India. The US, in some cases, where it's quite cold, and also, you may know that Microsoft recently, not very recently, they actually had a data center underwater. Why did they do that? Sounds crazy, doesn't it? Why would you want to have a data center underwater? And similarly, Google and some other people have actually opened data centers above the Arctic Circle. Why is that? Once again, they're actually playing a shell game. What they are doing is they're trying to reduce the cooling costs by blowing cool air from the atmosphere in. So they want to reduce the energy cost of refrigeration or AC or HVAC, whatever you want to call it, simply by using the Arctic air and cooling their data center in that way. Similarly, if you have a data center underwater like Microsoft had, then you can use the water itself will actually cool the system. You don't actually have to do much there. So in such cases, the PUE is supposed to be as low as 1.1 or 1.2. But that's not really meaningful if you have a good design and you're not using Arctic air or your data center is not under the sea or something like that. So anyway, so in all these cases, that metric is the second metric, which is the minimize the fraction of idle or wasted energy. If you regard the lighting and cooling and all those things as being wasted energy because it's not actually going into computing, then you minimize the fraction of idle or wasted energy in the system while doing some work. And those, the Energy Star program and other such certifications and Bureau of Energy Efficiency in India, all their metrics are based on the second notion of energy efficiency. They don't actually guarantee that your system is consuming the least possible energy in doing work. And what I have been able to show, what one of my students did for her PhD, actually showed that these two metrics are actually incompatible, believe it or not. These two are not the same. So take the least amount of energy to complete some work is not the same as saying minimize the fraction of idle or wasted energy in doing that work. So in some cases, you actually have a higher amount of idle or wasted energy, but actually don't take total less energy in doing that piece of work. And what I would say is that the first metric, which is not very often used by the certification bodies and so on, is actually the more meaningful one. But we should also say that the PUE has some critics for that reason. So these two measures of energy efficiency are incompatible because they cannot be simultaneously optimized for an arbitrary system. So a system running in a way that consumes the least possible energy while completing some work will not be always most efficient in the second measure. And conversely, if you want to optimize the system by the second measure, then the overall energy consumption of that system is not always minimal. This was a Sadhana paper, sir. You should be very happy. This was a paper in Sadhana. I don't know if you actually noticed that.
Good.
I don't know if you noticed that. So anyway, so coming back to this, US data centers of course consume 90 billion kilowatt hours of electricity a year, which is a huge number of coal power plants, coal burning plants, and then they are responsible for emitting tens of millions of metric tons of greenhouse gases, and this is about now considered to be 2% of the global carbon emissions, and which can go even further. And the speculation was that by 2030 it will go to 3 to 15% of the carbon emission. And here, once again, you have two complementary approaches to mitigate this problem. One is to increase data center energy efficiency and then improve the percentage of renewable energy used in data centers. So make each data center more energy efficient, number one. Number two is let the data centers run as they are or something like that, but use more renewable energy where possible. And particularly Europe, the second one is considered very important. How do I get more renewable energy into the data center? And Europeans have a metric that they have defined called REN%. So REN% is simply what percentage of your energy comes from renewables. That's what REN% is. So if you are, once again, so for example, I keep giving the example of my institution, but that's not only data center, but nonetheless, say let's say our REN% will be 40. So out of the energy that we consume, 40% is renewable. So 10% is what they actually talk about. And a considerable amount of energy in data centers is used in cooling, and reducing the energy need for cooling is one of the ways to reduce the energy consumed. The PUE metric is once again an ISO standard, and then it gives the total ratio of total power in data center to the power consumed by the computing equipment. Ideal PUE is supposed to be 1 or theoretically 1, but real data centers usually operate at 2 or more. And in fact, in many cases in India, you will even see 3. And in fact, in India, in many cases, data centers actually are worse than 3 or worse than 2 because they also run diesel. So they're not just drawing more power, they're actually using captive diesel generators because they don't trust the main supply. And the PUE is actually a controversial metric. It's not, it has its detractors because while it's important to encourage lower energy consumption data centers, it does not represent an unambiguous measure of energy efficiency. This is an exact quote. And the way I read it is because it is the second metric, not the first. It does not actually tell you that the data center is itself, the computing systems in the data center themselves are energy efficient. It only tells you what the fraction of the computing power is to the other power, or how much other things are going on, how much is the energy efficient, how much the energy use of the other systems is compared to computing systems. It does not tell you that the computing itself is sufficiently energy efficient. And in terms of renewable energy in data centers, you either can produce their own captive solar or wind energy or draw power from renewable sources that happen to be around. A metric called REN%, which I just mentioned, has been defined, and then what percentage of the power in the data center is being used from renewables. The ideal REN% is 100, but once again, I just made the point that getting to 100 can be quite difficult in many cases. But in some cases, this is not realistically achievable in many cases, so you can try to get to 90 or 95 or something. 100 may not be very easy, but then again there's another issue that comes up, which is, can you guess what it is? I think some of you are losing. Maybe it's the wrong time of day, right? People are tired. No, so what happens is that when you have this whole notion of 10% and you want to maximize it or optimize it, and you want to actually use renewables, you also have the problem that you have to have what are known as SLAs. What is an SLA? Can you show of hands? Service level agreement, yes. So you have service level objectives, which are business objectives. Service level agreements are agreements which are written down, legal agreements which have to be executed. And I cannot really say, I'm sorry, but this machine cannot run right now because the sun is not shining. There is an SLA which says that you need a certain amount of uptime or you need to have certain things being done in a timely way. So in some cases, you are obliged to actually keep your equipment running, even when it's not energy efficient or whatever other thing you do so, because your SLA demands that you have a certain level of performance. So, for example, a system like this laptop which I'm using right now, this has what we would call as say 3 nines reliability, right? So let's say that it fails once in 1,000 hours. So it has 1 hour of downtime for 1,000 hours of time, including updates and all those things, right? So that is 3 nines. And 3 nines is actually pretty decent for a personal computing system. You probably get less than that in many systems. For most industrial systems, you need 5 nines. For highly safety critical systems or ultra critical systems like space launch systems and so on, you want 8 nines, 9 nines, and so on. And in many cases, you have SLAs which say that you must have 3 nines, 4 nines, whatever. I cannot really say, because the sun is not shining, I'm going to turn this equipment off. That's just not going to be permissible in many cases. So the point here is that rent percent cannot be looked at in isolation. You actually have to work it around many other issues that come up that you have to maintain services. Okay, so this is one piece of work that a student, not really a student, in fact a young collaborator did with me during the pandemic. So we were all sitting at home. So this was a young person, I think not much older than some of you are, and he was an employee of a company in Bangalore, and because we all went into lockdown and many people just left, so she went back to Delhi, which was her hometown, and then she called me from Delhi one day and she wanted to work with me on something. And of course I said no, because I'm a nasty guy. But she was very nice and she was very persistent. And it turned out that we could actually come up with some problem that she worked on with me, and it became a fairly decent piece of work. So the idea here was that how can I actually schedule and locate computing loads to improve rent percent in a computer system? So we want to be able to schedule computer jobs and services geographically to take advantage of renewable energy availability. So this is one example of a problem that I have personally worked on. It's not the only thing that can be done, and it's not the end of the game. It's not really, once again, the final answer in the final chapter of the book. There is a lot more to be done. And the basic idea here is that while you cannot really produce renewable energy whenever you want, sometimes you can actually schedule the job in a location where the renewable energy is available, right? So I can actually try to hop the job, because job relocation is possible. VMware and so on will do it for you. It's quite possible to actually relocate services to a data center other than the one that is on right now. There are some constraints to that, but we'll ignore that for the moment. So it is possible to locate computing jobs to various locations thanks to high network speeds and available technology. So how can I opportunistically take advantage of this and relocate jobs to make sure that jobs run wherever possible with renewable energy? So that was the whole approach that we did, and I won't get into the technical aspects of it. I just mentioned very briefly what's going on. So you have green energy and brown energy both available to a data center, and then you have a prediction module that does certain things and so on. And then you have a scheduler which actually puts the job wherever the renewables are available. And that was this Vijay Sharma is the person who did this work, and disappeared a few years ago in this journal, Sustainable Computing. And once again, there's a lot more to be done here. This is not the this is not the final chapter of the book. Not a lot more possible to be done. And once again, we were able to show through simulations that with a rent-aware scheduler, you could actually keep the rent percent quite high while meeting SLAs. This is important. So here, this will be what actually happens over a certain number of days when you have to meet SLAs and so on, and keep going the standard way. And then if you use our scheduler, what we propose, you actually keep a fairly high rent percent while also meeting the requirements on the SLAs and so on. That's what it says. And the other problem I'll also briefly mention, and these are just examples by the way. These are just a few of the things that I personally know of. This is not once again a comprehensive introduction to all the issues that go on. There are other things I could also talk about, but that would make the talk very lengthy. So I'll make, how much time do I have now? Sorry. I don't know exactly when I started.
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. I'll try to wrap it up. It's not that much. So electric vehicles, of course, are a lot in use right now. They're a key part of the transition to a sustainable transportation system, because transportation is a big source of greenhouse gases. We all know that, right? Diesel and so on. And that is why, in fact, the government is also encouraging, the governments of various countries are encouraging electrical transportation and so on. And they tend to be more energy efficient. And there are a lot of research problems also with EVs. And some of the research problems, of course, are in the automotive engineering or electrical engineering or mechanical engineering domains, but there are computing problems also, which is where somebody like me would come in. And in fact, I had a PhD student complete his thesis on the computing aspects of such problems recently. He finished his PhD in January, a couple of months ago. And one problem that comes up is that EV charging is much slower, right? So if I have a diesel car or a petrol two-wheeler or something, you just take it to a petrol bunk or a gas station and just fuel up, right? You can do that in minutes, literally. So it doesn't take a lot of thought. As the vehicle gets empty, as the fuel runs out, you just pull it somewhere and you fuel up and you keep going. That is not how it works when you have EVs. With EV scheduling, first of all, EV chargers are not always as easy to locate, and even if they are, filling up is much more complex. It takes much more time. Now there are ideas that people are trying, like battery switching, battery swapping. So you can actually have a fully charged battery and you swap out the discharged battery and you put in the you swap out the discharged battery and swap in the fully charged one. But assuming that you don't do that, because there are logistical issues with battery swapping and so on also. Assuming that you stick to charging at the vehicle only, what are the issues that come up? And there's a lot of research that's actually out there. And one issue that comes up is that if everyone charges their EVs at the same time, the load on the grid will be humongous. And this, believe it or not, is also happening in some cases in the US, in some localities and so on. Because the US power grid, though much more mature, is also older in many cases. In India, you don't realize this, we don't think about this, we have been used to thinking about us as poor people and so on, but many of our technologies are actually more recent. Because they were actually developed, or many of our systems have come up much more recently, whereas in the US, many of the bridges and highways and even electrical grid and so on, they're actually much older. So in some cases, they were not actually meant to stand alone. And one problem in this regard is EV charge scheduling, once again, where you don't want to trip the grid and you also want to have reasonable quality of service for the people who use EVs. That's of course once again an NPR problem. But there is a lot of work done there, and we have something to think about there also. Charging station planning. So if you have a city, and we actually, my former student and I, we did this work where if you have to plan charging stations, so where should the charging stations be, and how many charging stations do you need? So if you don't have enough charging infrastructure, that leads to range anxiety. Range anxiety is exactly what it sounds like. So will I run out? Should I charge now? Should I not take it because I don't have enough range? So it has to take into account the characteristics of EVs. So how many, what is the range of a Tata Nexon or the Tesla, whatever vehicle you have and so on. So what is the driving range? What is the expected behavior of drivers? And things like that. So broadly speaking, there are two questions here. Charging station need estimation. So how many charging stations do I need? And the second is CS placement, which is where should the charging stations be? So for the second one, you need to have some notion of the GIS and so on. What are the geographical constraints of that area? So you cannot really put a charging station in the middle of a lake or inside a mountain. You need to have some notion of what is actually there. Right? So CS placement is a problem, and then CS need estimation. Where should you, how many CSs do you need? And the existing works, typically they have hybrid or revolutionary algorithms using, your PSO and so on, particle form optimization and calling optimization and so on. And they have dealt with this in certain ways, but they don't consider certain practical issues like variable rate charging or fast flow chargers. And so some of the solutions, it turns out, are not very practical. What we also saw is that some of the published solutions we have seen, and these are solutions published in very good journals, they are completely impractical because they work on a very tiny scale. You have just 3 vehicles and 5 chargers or something like that, or you have maybe 10 vehicles and 3 chargers, it will work fine. But when you try to scale up without those bonkers, the whole system collapses. And we noticed that in a few cases, so we actually had to try to come up with something better than that. And that's what this fellow did. So he actually used an approach which he called as HCL, which is a hybrid of PSO and FFA, 5-5 algorithm, and gigaflight strategy. And that is a better solution to this. And we have different exploitation capabilities of these heuristic algorithms, and then you cooperate between them. So you have these two experts. These two are heuristic experts, which are both trying to solve a problem, and they also cooperate. They are not fighting each other. And then you have leaf right strategy to escape local minimum, which does happen. So then, based on all this, we came up with this solution, with this paper. That's one example of that one. And then I'm not going to read. Basically, we had 2 examples. One is Sioux Falls is a real system in the US, and Guangzhou is in China. And in those cases, we came up with certain statistics on how well it does when we actually compare with what's already there. And so it's evaluated on various measures, and there are metrics which show how good it has been. And the second part, the second problem I'll just briefly mention is that in the majority of EV charging station planning, once again, charging station planning is the problem of knowing where to put the charging station and how many you need, right? In most of them, they look at it from a EV user's perspective. So where should the charging station be for the EV user, but they don't look at it from the urban planner or policymaker perspective. So our work is able to do that, where you have, if you give me a city and a layout with some EVs already there, what should be the number of charging stations and where should they be, and what, given a certain state of charge. And once again, this goes to the question of how much risk-taking behavior is there in the community of EV users. So for example, it's quite possible that in Bangalore, people have a lot of range anxiety, so they will not let their battery go below 30%. But maybe in Kolkata, they have less range anxiety and they're willing to get it below 10% in some cases. So knowing the behavior of such things, you would actually have to think about that. And in fact, in Bangalore, we would need about 22,000 charging stations given an EV penetration of 50%, which means if 50% of all the vehicles in Bangalore are EVs, then we need these many charging stations. We actually did that calculation and found what it is. And we can do that for near city also. And assuming once again that you have the minimum state of charge is 10%. If you change that number, it also changes. So finally, we'll just close with this. In contemporary thinking, we have three types of ethics. Virtue ethics is the classical philosophical ethics, where you have virtues like goodness, fairness, honesty, all those. So those are virtue ethics. So you have truthfulness, honesty, and so on. And the behavior is ethical as long as it is consistent with the virtue. And that is what all the great philosophers and teachers want to have. So every great philosopher has this teaching, the teachings of the Buddha or whatever it is, or that person will teach that you have to imbibe this particular virtue in you. Deontology is the type of ethics where you have to conform or comport to a certain set of rules. This is all of the laws we have and all of the rules you have in almost any organization. That is deontology. They are not concerned with virtues. Yes, they want you to be virtuous at some level, but they want you to follow the rules. So any rule-based system is deontology, and the consequentialism is, first of all, do no harm. Or as long as the consequences of doing something are good, the action is ethical. And of course, each one of these types of ethics actually has its pluses and minuses. No single type of ethics is actually completely there. So this would be once again the more religious type of ethics. Deontology is once again more of the organizational ethics. And consequentialism is when you say, oh, I actually told a lie, but I did that to save somebody's life. There might be some special case where this also applies. And ethical concerns in sustainability are mostly consequentialist. Right? Because you don't really have a set of rules and you simply say that I am following these rules and therefore everything is good. And it's not really a virtue to simply say I'm sustainable. You actually have to think about the consequences of what you're doing and think about it in that way. And in general, when we think about AI systems and so on and think about their ethics, most concerns right now have been with algorithmic bias. Why is it that women get lower credit scores than men? Why is it that LLMs, there was a famous paper that came out some years ago where it tags a woman as a homemaker and the programmer is always a man. So does that mean a woman cannot be a programmer? I mean, how is that even logical? How is that even tolerable? Not just logical. So there are all these biases which algorithmic system inherits from the data set, and therefore it also comes up with these very biased labels and so on. So those are the kinds of issues that people are concerned with in terms of ethics and AI. But in general, we also have to think about sustainability as an ethics issue, which has not so far happened, except in some rare cases like Tim Gavru was saying, that's the person who called Google's AI system as unethical. So policies such as premature obsolescence of computing systems at all scales. Now, Apple has been accused, correctly accused, this is not just a conspiracy theory, that they will actually deliberately slow down their systems. They will actually create system upgrades which make your laptop less and less effective, which make your iPhone less and less effective over time. Why? So that you can go out and buy a new one. That's good for Apple, bad for the environment. That's not how it should be. So such designed obsolescence or premature obsolescence, which is a policy that many companies like Apple have pursued, are quite unethical from the point of view of sustainability. And in fact, Apple has partnered up because of threats from the European Union. The EU actually threatened to fine Apple, and in fact they have fined Apple in several cases, but Anyway, so these companies are gradually learning to smarten up and not do such things. And finally, we come to the question of what is a post-carbon future. So if we don't have this, if you go back to the greenhouse gases emission and the carbon cycle diagram that we saw, right? But I'm not going to put that up again. So if you don't have all those greenhouse gases coming up again, what will the future look like then? We want to once again keep some of the benefits of the industrial revolution with us. We don't want to give those up. We don't want to go back to a purely agrarian society like in the old days and so on, but at the same time, we want to be sustainable. So that is what is meant by a post-carbon future. So you're no longer actually polluting the atmosphere, you're no longer doing all the nasty things that we are currently doing, but you should have some amount of the benefits that we have. So this is a hypothetical or possible future time where once again the badness of burning fossil fuels and creating the pollution and so on is not there, but the benefits that we have accrued will remain. And what would that society look like? What kind of technologies are going to be there? We don't know. That I think is once again where you have to apply your mind. We don't have a good answer to that right now. And in this regard, I'll mention one more thing. Corporate social responsibility, CSR, this has become quite big, I would say, in the last 15, 20 years, right? CSR did not used to be a thing until about 2006. And these are companies like Intel and so on. So Intel actually puts out a very nice booklet or brochure. I'm sure some of you have seen that, where they say, oh, they actually cleaned up this lake. They actually put so much fresh water back into the system and so on. Happy, very good. That's nice. You should do that. But in some cases, they are also greenwashing. So greenwashing is in some cases where they have deceptive labeling or deceptive showing of virtue. So what is at a personal level called as virtue signaling? Virtue signaling is I'm telling you or I'm showing off to you that I'm such a virtuous person. I'm not. And you know that. Or maybe you don't know that, but I'm still falsely claiming or showing off some virtue which I don't really have. And so that is what is actually going on with greenwashing. So you know what whitewashing means? Whitewashing is of course sort of hiding the flaws and sort of painting over a lot of the deficiencies and problems. So greenwashing is the same thing, deceptive labeling, advertising or propaganda. So for example, that sorry to say this, a lot of the fashion brands, men's and women's, fashion clothing, fashion wear, fashion this, that, everything, those are extremely bad for the atmosphere. Their practices and their policies and their everything is pretty horrible, really. They're doing some really nasty stuff. But if you look at their brochures and if you look at what they're actually saying about themselves, you think everything is wonderful. That is a classic example of greenwashing. And not only them, even the IT companies are doing it, many other people are doing it. So you actually have to overcome this, and we as a society, just like, we have to, we hold our politicians accountable every so often, right? We all have this sense that as citizens, we have the responsibility to choose our people wisely, and therefore, when they do something wrong, we punish them for it, and when they do something right, which we like, we may reward them for it also. In the same way, even with the corporate entities, we have to become responsible and know that, just it's not enough for them to just make money any way they want. They actually have to be reasonable about how to do it. Thank you. I think I was mostly on time. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Otherwise, I'm done. Thank you.
This is one thing is about the civilizational issue.
Yes.
Like Mayan civilization you told. And if you look at the equatorial region, all the old civilization grew in equatorial region. That is because the atmosphere there is good, etc. and all that. People, the human life survived. Now the question is that if the temperature is rising, maybe the equatorial region will vanish. It's all fair. But on the
Higher latitude,
higher
new civilization
altitude,
which will be better than ours.
maybe
Quite
the
possible.
civilization will grow.
Maybe, I don't know.
So I don't know whether it is a good thing or bad. And another
I would say it's not a good thing for us. Let's say it like that.
Not
So
a good thing
we,
for us,
If
that's
we are
true.
replaced by dolphins or monkeys or something and they have a great civilization, that's fine. But as human beings, I would say it's too bad for us that we didn't learn to behave ourselves and remain
Right.
the dominant species, yeah, in that
I
sense.
agree,
yes.
agree. But I am saying that every civilization has a way of replenishing itself. And
Quite
another thing that I
One
noticed,
prediction we have seen, sir, that there will be the chances of greatest human migration from the eastern part of Africa to the other parts due to this.
that's precisely what I am saying. Basically, people will move there. The other issue that I saw is that the sustainable computation that you are talking about, it is basically a great computing architecture that you presented.
That was one example I gave, that is by no means the whole picture, not even close. It is just one example of something which I have done. There are literally hundreds of other things that other people have done which I may not know,
Okay,
and
so-
which don't really fit on the page here, or fit into this context.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there are
Many more things, yes, absolutely, no question about it.
So essentially you are saying that I will relocate the computation somewhere else.
Correct.
And that precisely is the theoretical idea behind the framework.
No, so.
Or anything else there.
So, we can probably take that as a more detailed discussion later, but fundamentally, if you want to improve the 10% of your data center or overall for your computing service, what can you do? One thing you can do is, once again, given that you have to meet the SLAs and so on, you cannot simply kill the job when the sun is not shining and so on. So you can relocate the service to wherever the renewable energy is available in an opportunistic way. And that basic idea, in a limited implementation, is what I talked about there. It is by no means the end of the story or so on. There's many more things to be
is
done.
there an idea of great electrical renewable energy?
So basically, you would relocate the job to wherever the renewable
That
energy
is fine.
available.
But I
Yeah.
am saying that renewable energy grid can also be
So basically, in that case, there are certain. Once again, I'm not a power engineer, but there are certain important power engineering problems that come up. One of them, as I understand, is very simple. That you cannot actually transmit power at a distance except through wires. I don't know how to put it. So the point is
You are
that
saying that,
there are ways. There has, since the time of Marconi and Lacy Bose, there has been a way to transmit signals over a distance, but there is not really a way to transmit power at a distance except with wires. And that's a very big problem, because if you could do that, then you would simply have a big solar power plant in Sahara or something like that. And you can use that, you can have inside a 50 by 50 kilometer square area inside the Sahara Desert, you can produce enough solar energy to supply the whole world. If you could transmit that power to other places without wires, you could do that.
no, but Nikola Tesla's idea was wireless transmission
Yes,
of
and I
power.
don't think it has been realized at a commercial scale even now. Yes.
One question. So actually, I
Give her a mic, please. Give her a mic.
Sir, I have bunch of papers of battery swapping in electric vehicles.
Okay.
So there is a notion of data security that researchers are mentioning over there.
Right.
But it's not clear to me where the data threat is.
Okay, now, that's also a deep topic and one frankly that I'm not very good at. I don't necessarily know the complete answer to your question, but I can tell you very briefly that in general, because these EVs, if you leave them, or if people are able to track your behavior, I don't mean your behavior as a person, any EV user's behavior, if they're able to track, they can get a sense of what that person is doing.
Because if it is a navigation system, then the users will ask query to the navigation system. So the user is sending some data, maybe the destination information or something. But I'm wondering why everybody is talking about data threats in battery swapping, because it's just the kind of swapping where the empty.
No, as I understand it, once again, my understanding is far from perfect. My understanding is that it allows people to infer the EV user's choices of where that person may be going. How much, depending on the fact, if they are able to infer your behavior by looking at patterns of how much the battery is discharged on how many days, right? So every Saturday, this EV user is coming in and her battery is discharged to this level. So if you are able to draw some conclusion based on that, so they may be able to infer where you go. So basically they are able to draw conclusions about your spatial behavior or some other behavior. And people have some privacy concerns about that. Whereas if I simply fill in my diesel car, for example, they may not be really able to do that. Yes, sir. Please, don't sign there again.
Yeah, in the classic distributed scheduling, you have the work stream. If something is not, if something is lazy or he does not have any job, you can always do that, and that is shown to be random work scheduling is shown to be very efficient. So this is one thing. But the one thing I noticed in a recent communications of ASEAN is they say, like the conferences, they leave a lot of purpose. Because if you have
Yes.
to take into account the
Yes,
travel
yes,
and others. So they have said maybe this is the one which has to change so that the carbon print can be reduced. But what is the lesson is, sustainability you can think of only if you think what you need. It is just like saying, God has created enough food for all, but He cannot satisfy the greed of even one person. No, it is just like that. Sustainability, like a clicking, causes a lot of carbon print.
No, so-
But how many clicks each one does, whether you need it or not, is something you can't. That is where if you are going to pay, like in the blockchain, they're going to keep track of what is the carbon print, what you have at the end of the year on which you have to pay tax. And then that is where perhaps in some sense it would reduce and then look for sustainability. The sustainability, what you have been saying, it is just like, Fanyaman had this reliability, this one duplication of many of those things. That went out through the census, saying that I can reduce the duplication of the components itself, kind of a thing. But they didn't consider how much is the value of the things for the census. So now in the same sense, I think the sustainability, unless your consumption gets reduced, I don't think there is any way you can reduce the carbon print. This is something
I'll give,
like in
I'll give-
all the AI people, all the unnecessary experiments that are done through BART or
No,
this
Bert,
one.
no, so I'll give what amounts to a non-answer, but I will make 2 points about this. One is, yes, the computer science community has been very responsible because the CS conferences are always held in,
Experimental science.
no, CS
has
in particular.
been fairly irresponsible because you
CS in
want to do it
particular,
for the sake
the
of
CS
UGC or
conference-
ACT.
The CS conferences are always held in very exotic locations. They are held in locations
All
where.
conferences are.
So they are, people actually use the conference as an excuse to actually have a vacation. That's what it is. It's not really about
That is
the,
needed for business, right?
that is one. So
That's another
that
aspect.
is an aspect of
Job
improving
creation.
the community's behavior, the community of computer scientists. The second is something you may have heard of called Jevons paradox, JDVONS. Jevons paradox is a very well-known problem which is known since the 19th century. And the paradox is as follows, that James Watt, what did James Watt actually do? He did not invent the steam engine, unlike what many people think. He improved the steam engine. The steam engine already was there. He improved it, he did not invent it, just like Edison did not invent the light bulb, he improved it. Right? So, the Jevons paradox says that when you actually make something more efficient, it results in an increase in the consumption of that resource, not less. So when James Watt improved the efficiency of steam engines, it did not reduce the amount of coal being consumed. It caused more coal to be consumed. Why? Because for a certain amount of coal, it could get more output, it could get more industrial production. Those steam engines which James Watt had designed were actually better than the previous ones. So people started using these more efficient steam engines and getting more done. And of course, that increased the amount of coal being consumed. So the point here is that when you make something more energy efficient, that does not automatically make it more, that does not actually reduce the consumption of that on a global scale. It actually increases the consumption of that. So your point, I think that we have to, mitigate our lust, if I can call it that, or mitigate
No, our
hunger.
consumption has to be
No,
reduced.
that's what it is. So basically,
That's the
as human
basic.
beings individually and as a society, human society, the fact that we want to consume more and more is not just related to efficiency, it is also related to the basic identity as a consumer. So basically, every person nowadays, thanks to marketing and so on, is identified by their consumption. You will become so happy if you consume this product. That's the way all the ads run, right? So you will have this really beautiful life. You'll have this Instagram-worthy life if you consume something. So your identity is no longer defined by some philosophy or some higher value. Your identity is a consumer. And if you consume some other product or service, you'll be even happier than you are now. Forget all the facts that which say otherwise. Right? Consumption does not make anyone happier, we know that, but nonetheless,
No,
that is the
like
message
a
we send.
silicon foundry, right? Unless you have that many chips that are coming into it, you don't invest. That is the basic reason, right? Now you are going to invest 1.2 lakh crores to have 26 nanometer chips. So how much carbon print you are going to put in? That's the basic reason. See, this is a different question altogether. Unless our consumption gets reduced, you can't reduce carbon.
Just one clarification regarding the Bangalore charging station requirement. Is that 32,000, right?
Yes.
Is it the Bangalore city itself, or it includes lots of other areas?
Bangalore urban area, BBMP limits. Bangalore.
Because I thought that is too much.
That is assuming that 50% of all the traffic in 50% of all the vehicles in Bangalore are electric.
Are there petrol pumps, number of petrol pumps in Bangalore like that?
No, not really.
Yes.
The number of, no, the,
That is
because
precisely my point.
it has to be much less because a petrol station can service many more vehicles per hour or per minute or per day compared to a charging station.
You are saying charging points.
Charging station.
Charging
Given a
station.
standard charging station.
So charging station.
See, the charging points can be at home.
Yeah, if you include all that, yes,
So
yes.
32,000 does not mean anything.
So
Yeah,
this,
in that case, 32,000 doesn't mean anything.
okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your lucid and insightful presentation. I think your presentation today has sent the message loud and clear that will not be that nobody could eat nothing because nothing or little could be done. We will be somebody who did everything because we know that we are saving our art. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to an end to today's international conference first session. We'll now break for tea, but then before that, I have the pleasure of inviting you all for a cultural evening organized on the behest of Speak Brigade, Virashad. So the program will start at 6. So I again repeat, we'll now break for tea. And then at 6 o'clock, I request all of you to kindly join us for our cultural evening at the SOP auditorium. Thank you so much for joining. Now, please, I request all the delegates to kindly move forward for the evening tea. Thank you so much.